Привет, my comrades, it's Pooch and welcome back to another video. I gotta start off by apologizing if my voice sounds a bit weird. I've got a pretty rough cold that is literally lighting my throat on fire, and on top of that I got a runny and blocked nose, so the audio might suffer because of that, but I'll be doing my best to not make that impact the quality whatsoever. Also, huge shout out to my girlfriend for making the thumbnail. I gave her very minimal instructions, but the end result turned out to be amazing. She's going to be hopefully doing all of the thumbnails for the upcoming uploads. Today's video is a bit different because I'm going to be doing a sort of review of a video game that came a long time ago. This is going to be the first time that I'm ever doing a proper review of a game on this channel, so go easy on me here. I'm going to start off by introducing the game and then talking about the plot and the story, with me trying my absolute best to not spoil anything major, and then after that we'll dive deep into the gameplay system, what was done right, what was done wrong. Do keep in mind that at the end of the day, these will be my own personal takes. You might agree with me on some things, while you might disagree with me on other points. Let's not drag the video intro too long, and let's jump right into the review. 2013 was a great year for video games. A lot of new IPs made their way into stardom, like The Last of Us, which is to this day considered one of the all-time best narrative-driven video games ever created. Another small game, made by a very small and unknown video game studio, came out that year. It had the name of GTA 5. We can add to the list many other banger titles, like Assassin's Creed Black Flag, Bioshock Infinite, and Battlefield 4, but I forgot to mention one other game that made its way to the scene, which I think is pretty underrated and not talked about enough. Some of you might quit the video instantly because of what I'm about to say, but I've never played probably a Metal Gear Solid game. I know, shocking, right? Jake Baldini would probably kill me if he ever hears me saying that. But here I am in 2025 saying to myself, what kind of games have I not played? And the Metal Gear franchise was the first one to pop up in my mind. The game I'm going to be talking about is not exactly a Metal Gear Solid game, but instead it's a spin-off, and a pretty awesome one, I'll give it that. Some of you might have guessed it by now, but today's big name is none other than Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. After having played and finished the game, I'm low-key sad that I haven't played it back when it first came out, but also at the same time happy that I didn't. More on that at the end of the video. But the reason that I even stumbled upon this hidden gem were the Steam reviews. Other than the fact that I was interested in the Metal Gear games, sometimes when I want to pick up a new game to play, I just go to Steam and filter by ratings. As I was scrolling through the list and seeing some pretty familiar names like Portal 2, Vampire Survivors, Terraria, and Persona 4, what caught my eye was this picture at the very end of the 250 top Steam games list. It's showing what it looks like a white/gray haired cyborg cutting through some metal, and I was like, oh yeah, isn't that the game where you get to fight like a very buff dude that looks like a politician? Spoiler alert, he is indeed. And you get to cut people into like a million pieces. Keep in mind that I knew about all of this because I've seen some clips of the game over on Instagram and YouTube back in the day, but I've never had the chance to play it, so I was like, okay, this time I'm not going to run away. I need to add a Metal Gear game to my huge catalog of single player games completed, and so I managed to do the leap of faith, and oh boy did I not regret it. Before we talk about the plot, let's just very briefly go over who made this game. Kojima Productions are a Japanese game studio created in 2005 by none other than the man himself, Hideo Kojima, the father of the Metal Gear game franchise, so they naturally were the ones working on this game at first. The production went through a long development process, but then at the beginning of 2011, Kojima decided that it was not his mission anymore to finish this game up, and decided to hand over the development to Platinum Games. Who are they, you might be asking? Well, to no one's surprise, they are another Japanese video game studio. What did they make? Well, to start things off, they are the creators of the very loved game series Bayonetta and the very underrated Nier Automata game. Back then, they had only released some small games alongside Bayonetta 1, which came out in 2010, but by passing the torch to them, they completely revamped the entire game. Kojima was only a supervising director by 2011 and not a producer anymore, so Platinum Games worked on it for 2 years, and on the 19th of February 2013, the game finally came out. The game's story isn't its strongest point, and I think that it is obvious for many people who have played the game before, since Platinum Games were the ones who got their hands on it. Their main focus was the gameplay and especially the combat, which we'll get into after talking a bit about the story. The plot here is very confusing. I did some research and found out that Hideo Kojima himself gave a response, which was in itself muddled. He said that Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance story takes place after the events of Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots, but then he asked that this is a spin-off, which means that it has its own self-contained narrative unrelated to the Metal Gear Solid series. Look man, I know that I haven't played the Metal Gear Solid 4 game, so some of you might be laughing at me for having jumbled ideas, but I swear man, Kojima likes to always confuse players. In Rising Revengeance, you get to play as Raiden, a cyborg who has been contracted for VIP protection, military training, and other duties by a PMC called Maverick Security Consultant. PMC, for those of you who don't know by the way, stands for a private military company. The game starts you off inside of a vehicle protecting a VIP, which seems to be the Prime Minister of Biafra, judging by the flag pin that he has on his suit. Biafra, I hope I pronounced that right by the way, was a former African country before it was absorbed into neighboring Nigeria. The game lets you know that this country was suffering from a massive civil war and that Mani, I hope I pronounced his name right as well, who is the vice president you're protecting, was a huge factor in its stoppage, so naturally they send you their strongest cyborg to protect him, and then a classic video game scenario happens, the convoy gets ambushed, you crash, and the game finally starts you off fighting your aggressors, who are also part of another PMC called Desperado Enforcement LLC. In this mission you'll get to fight what they call a Metal Gear. After absolutely smashing the metal behemoth and cutting it into pieces, you get to the part where you discover that you're not the biggest fish in the pond. Sam, who is the leader of the aggressors, absolutely trashes you. It was very predictable by the way, but to their credit, back in 2013 it wasn't so common for a game to introduce at the beginning of it a boss that absolutely destroys the player. The only one that comes to mind is Demon Souls, but yeah, after making you feel like an absolute boss running through the city wreaking havoc, you get put in your place, and then you go through the whole game fighting every single member of this organization, and later on find that they are not only a criminal organization of course, but they are linked to the US government. And you find out that behind the scenes there is someone else bossing this terrorist team around. Not going to mention who he is, but all I gotta say is that he has some massive aura, alright, and some pretty crazy ideas. You're obviously not going to tackle this journey alone. The PMC that you belong to are backing you up. You've got 4 main characters supporting you along the way. Boris Popov, a Russian musclehead who is also the field's operations supervisor. You'll get to exchange with him quite a bit during the game. Next up on the list is my favorite member called Doctor, and that's Doctor with a K because he's German, who is, according to the wiki of the game, not an official member of the PMC, but rather an affiliate. He's my favorite supporting character. I mean, he's your typical unhinged super genius who gets to come up with all sorts of crazy gadgets, and he's the one who helps you improve your gear and turn you into the ultimate cyborg samurai. And although he might seem like a shut-in scientist, later on you get to see that he's no coward and that you shouldn't judge a book by his cover and count him out of the fight. The other 2 characters are, in my opinion, not that memorable. I didn't get attached to them that much, and they don't have a lot of personality in my opinion. They both work in the same department. I think they're both technician experts. Their names are Kevin Washington and Courtney Collins. Even haven't finished the game, I still think that Raiden is a mystery. I don't know if the developers wanted it to be that way, but from what we know, he does his job to support his family, wife and daughter. His real name is Jack. He was in the past known as Jack the Ripper. Well, we all know why he could have been given that nickname, but other than that, we don't know much else about him. He's had a pretty rough childhood, so I assume he was a child soldier. He hurt and killed a lot of people in the past, and throughout this story he tries to become a better person. He's trying to escape from the past. Raiden does see himself as the sword of justice, prepared to deliver a killing blow to whoever dares harm innocent people. All the killing to him is justified because the men that face him have already made their choice, so they're responsible for their actions. But that belief later gets challenged by a certain Samuel. Throughout Jack and Sam's exchange, you'll get to witness one of the coolest, if not the best moment of the entire game, where Jack finally realizes a certain something. Anyways, can't talk much about it without spoiling the whole thing. The Desperados PMC, aka the bad guys, are harvesting children's brains, which on paper sounds awful, but they obviously have their own reasons and justifications for doing such a horrible thing, and you as the ultimate sword of justice have to obviously go against that and try to ruin their plans. The story is nothing to write home about, it's still pretty good, and some characters are pretty memorable, like the final boss or Samuel, who you get to have a revenge fight with later on in the story, which is in my opinion the best one in the entire game. But yeah, pretty solid story, but then again, it wasn't the main focus of the game. It's pretty short too. The game contains in total 8 missions which vary in length from one mission to another, so it'll take you around 5 to 7 hours to complete everything there is, of course not counting the collectibles. So yeah, it's a very short game. Forgot to mention that there is a certain special character that gets introduced midway through the game called Blade Wolf. He's a big one, pretty important in how the story unfolds, so yeah, watch out for that one. Now with the story out of the way, we get to the fun part, which is talking about the gameplay and mainly the combat. This game is a linear experience, so don't expect any open world sections, and to start things off, hey, stop right there, Butch here. And while editing this one, I realized that this part of the script is just me going off on the different things that I didn't like, so bear with me on this one, it's a bit long, we'll get to the good parts later on. Okay, bye! One complaint that I have is the lack of variety in the levels. I feel like every single level resembles the last one. You're always constrained to be in a city, fighting your way either inside of a building or outside on some rooftop, but the levels aren't that long, so it doesn't get that boring. And to their credit, there are some sections of the game where it's a tiny bit different. Like there's a section which is very short by the way, where you get to fight enemies in the dark. Okay, let's stop here and talk about this one. At first, when I got in and saw that there were no lights, I was like, oh yeah, that's awesome. That is a great change of pace. But I absolutely hated it. Wanna know why? Because this section was full of a certain enemy type called mastiffs. These are by far my least favorite enemy type. But these guys, man, I swear I'd rather take on all of the bosses in this game combined, attacking me at the same time, rather than me having to fight 3 or 4 of these guys at the same time. They're overpowered as hell, and keep in mind that I played this game on normal difficulty. They're very tanky, rapid, and agile, and before unlocking a certain mode later on in the game, in the earlier stages, you're going to suffer fighting them. They've got different grab attacks, they do a lot of damage, they can jump up in the air and land a 3-hit combo attack. And if you do manage to cut their arms off, oh no no no, huge mistake. They start drop kicking you in the face and good luck trying to dodge that one, and they spam it over and over again. They single-handedly contributed to about 80% of my deaths, so yeah, screw those guys. Back to the no light section, the enemy AI is very dumb in this game. Like I was stuck here for a long time, just straight staring at two different enemies. I wanted them to like take on the normal patrol routes so I can backstab them or maybe get past them unseen, but no, they just remain there unfazed and they don't move a single inch, and that was very frustrating. I know that it might look like I'm complaining a lot, but trust me, I'm going to get to the good parts of the game, and yes, there are a lot of good things to be said, but the stealth as well, I feel like it was very unnecessary for it to be part of the game, because it's a hack and slash game. In my opinion, it's just been added because it's a Metal Gear game, and they had to include it somehow, but it feels very forced. They've added boxes and barrels that you're encouraged to use as a way to hide from enemy sights, and I've tried using them, but to get past enemies or maybe into a good position to backstab, it never worked. And guess what the funny part is? The game sometimes gets mad at you for not doing a certain section using stealth. Like what? That was baffling to me. And my last two complaints are the following: one major one and the other one not so much. The first one is the camera. Sometimes during boss fights, I swear it was a bigger threat to my failure than the boss itself. It sometimes glitches out and just goes behind the character, or sometimes it refuses to go the way you intended it to go, which was very frustrating. And the other complaint is the fact that you can't pull up the game menus like the AR mode for example, which I'll explain later, and the items menu while you're running slash walking. Look, I understand it's a game made in 2013, but how hard can that be to implement? Like I'm fighting a boss and I want to switch my healing item to something else, or maybe my grenade for an RPG. You know what you have to do? Stop, let your character be completely still, exposed to any attack, and then you get to open up the menu. Yeah, sounds dumb, but what can you do? As for the AR system, it's a mechanic that lets you see enemies through walls when you press up on the D-pad. You know, nothing too groundbreaking. I guess its aim was to help with the stealth, but then again, this game didn't need to have a stealth element at all. So yeah, I don't see the reason why you should use it. Anyways, now that I got the bad things out of my chest, we can start talking about the good stuff. Since it's a game made by Platinum Games, the combat feels very smooth. It's super satisfying and the combos are great. In this game, you get to have one main weapon that you have equipped all the time, and there are 3 types of katanas that you get to use as a main weapon, and 3 other unique weapons, but you can only equip one at a time. These are boss weapons, so same as the Dark Souls series. After killing a boss, you get to have their weapon that you need to purchase from the editing your character menu using BPs, which is the currency of this game. You get it by landing long streak hits on enemies and finishing them off in your cool blade mode that I'll get into in just a minute, and by also completing missions. From all of the unique weapons, there was only one that really suited my playstyle and that I've continued using throughout the whole game, which is the pole blade slash arm. You get this this one pretty early on, and it's a game changer. The amount of range and AoE damage that it has is insane, plus it provides the ability to stun lock the enemies. Basically, they just take your hits one after another, and they can't do anything about it because they can't move. I'm not really sure if it's a must to use as a sub weapon, because sometimes enemies will start parrying your attacks and you can't break their guard using the normal katana, so that's where the pole blade comes in handy, for example. And for the combos that you can do, it ain't as in depth as in like Devil May Cry 5, for example, but it's got some depth and it's really fun. Just like in DMC5, you can buy new skills from, let's call it, the shop. I myself got all of the pole blade slash arm ones because they simply cool as hell. But if the other weapons suit your style, well then you have Dystopia, which is a tactical sai. Sai is essentially a small traditional Asian weapon used for stabbing. It makes you attack very quickly, and so it is good for one-on-one situations. Or the other choice, which is a pair of pincer blades, which are considered a heavy weapon. I feel like it doesn't go with your whole persona, you know, being a cool, fast samurai that cuts things in an instant, but hey, you do you. The main attraction of the game is the blade mode, which is a core mechanic in this game. Raiden here slows down time and starts lethally and very accurately cutting his opponents. The engine here handles dismemberment of the enemy body very well. Blade mode can be used to heal yourself after delivering critical cuts, and by that I mean hitting the red square. You perform what's called in-game as a zandatsu, which means cut and take in Japanese. Raiden here extracts the spine of his enemy, which heals him fully, and I think that is kind of broken and overkill, because you can go from 1 HP to full, and with the HP regeneration you also get your fuel cells maxed out. Fuel cells are what's used when you go into blade mode. It starts slowly draining while you're cutting people, and it gets refueled every time you land hits on enemies. The blade mode is also extensively used in boss fight cinematics to show Jack cutting a huge robot's leg, for example. You might think that after using it over and over again you get bored of it, but I personally didn't, and it is the mechanic that makes this game special and stand out. I'll applaud them as well for the variety of enemy types. There are some aerial type enemies as well basically helicopters and drones, but yeah, I forgot to mention that there is a dodge and parry mechanic in this game. The game I think does a poor job explaining things, like for example, once you get an enemy to low enough health, his body starts turning blue, which is an indicator to use blade mode. Okay, cool, but what they didn't mention is that sometimes Jack does some sort of acrobatic maneuver and time slows down and you get a Japanese character on the right side of the screen. This is an indicator that you have to go into blade mode and cut some parts of your enemy off. I found myself not understanding this mechanic earlier on and missing my chances, and I feel like the game poorly explained it, or probably never even did. And sorry, but the parry system in this game is god awful as well. I know that I've said I was done with complaints, but man is it poorly made. Raiden most of the time refuses to execute the parry, which by the way is very essential in certain fights, like the fight against Samuel later on in the game. But anyways, you can get away just fine by just hack and slashing your way through the game, at least that's what I did, or dodging, which requires you by the way to press X and A on your controller at the same time. Not very convenient, but yeah, do keep that in mind. This video is getting very long and I'm sorry, but I'm going to quickly go over the boss fights in this game. Like I mentioned before, you're going to be fighting all of the members of the Desperados PMC and also some other characters or massive robots, for example. I did enjoy most of the boss fights. Credit to the developers, they made sure that one of the bosses is half Algerian, which is super rare to see. As a fellow Algerian, huge respect. They did a good job to make sure that every boss fight feels unique, each with his or her own setting. They're epic, and this game features a lot of QTEs, which stands for quick timed events, and they're very satisfying. Reminds me a lot of Bayonetta, I mean duh, or Azura's Wrath. Some fights are very underwhelming, no spoilers, but the final boss and the penultimate one on file 6, basically chapter 6, are my favorites. The boss attack patterns in this game are straightforward, but some of them have unpredictable behavior, not going to lie there. You're not going to have to replay them a lot, at least I hope so. The boss that took me the most attempts was Samuel, and I think it was around 5 to 6 attempts, which is not bad at all, and it's mostly due to the fact that he's very different than the rest of the bosses that you have faced so far in the game, in a good way of course. So yeah, don't go in there expecting some From Software type bosses, but I feel that Platinum Games here did a pretty awesome job with some of the boss designs, and they did get creative with some of them. That's it for me guys, I've rambled about this game for long enough. If you're looking for a short and very solid action adventure game, then make sure to play Metal Gear Rising and Vengeance. It's a fun over the top hack and slash game. that doesn't take itself too seriously, and the reason that I wish I had played it back then when it came out was because of it feeling sometimes outdated. Like you can feel that this is a 2013 game, but on the other hand it makes me happy because it makes me feel nostalgic and makes me remember what gaming used to be like back in the good old days. So yeah, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, I'll give it a solid 8 out of 10. It has some setbacks, but with the cheap price that you can get it for during the sales period, $4 by the way, it's honestly not a bad pickup at all. Make sure to let me know what you guys think about this game in the comments. Have you played it? Will you be willing to try it? Did I do a good job reviewing it? Drop all of that down there, and thank you so much for getting to this part of the video. I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace!